We can easily find from many secular sources that the word hell is taken from a pagan name and concept. If you want to check it out for yourself, go to most any encyclopedia and look it up. So, why have our modern translations used this word so often? And why is the concept of hell so strongly stressed by our churches? Let's talk about that. A quick look at our currently used English translations reveals the following usage of the word hell within the confines of these volumes. Notice that our oldest translation, the King James, and its counterpart, the New King James, have even used the word extensively in the Old Testament. Also, as you can see from this chart, there are big differences in these Bible versions in the translation of this word. Why is this so? Probably the biggest reason is something you may not want to hear, but something which is real. It is called translator bias. Every translator brings in certain biases. But despite this, I believe you can get the message of salvation from any of these Bible translations that are mentioned above. Isaiah 55:11 still holds true when it says, "So shall my word be that goes out of my mouth. It shall not return to me empty, but it shall accomplish that which I purpose, and it shall succeed in the thing for which I sent it." But translator bias does make it harder, and it also makes it easier for some to mislead others. Now, I'm not saying that this is done deliberately, but it does happen, most of the time because those teachers have not done their homework. So now let's look at the Hebrew concept of life after death as it was used in the Old Testament. According to Herbert C. Brickdoe, writing in the Hebrew Union College Annual, the family tomb is a central concept in understanding the biblical views of the afterlife. The Old Testament name for this place was called Sheol. Just exactly why the King James and New King James have chosen to translate this word as hell on so many occasions is really baffling. According to Brickdoe, the early Israelites apparently believed that the graves of the family or tribe united into one, and that this unified collectivity is what the biblical Hebrew term refers to, called Sheol, the common grave of humans. Although not well defined in the Tanakh, which is the Hebrew Bible, Sheol was the subterranean underworld where the souls of the dead went after the body died. Initially, with the Old Testament Jews, there was no concept of reward or punishment associated with this place. But sometime during the Second Temple era, or a few hundred years before Christ, this concept changed. It was then thought that Sheol, or Hades in the Greek, had two compartments. This concept was confirmed by Josephus in his writings. Notice what he said concerning the first compartment. "Now as to Hades, wherein the souls of the good things they see, and rejoice in the righteousness and unrighteousness are detained, it is necessary to speak of it. This region is allotted as a place of custody for souls, ill which angels are appointed as guardians to them, who distribute to them temporary punishments agreeable to everyone's behavior and manners." I want you to notice here that he said that the punishments were temporary. We'll come back to this point in a few minutes. He also pointed out concerning this place that there was another compartment called the bosom of Abraham. Notice what he said about this. "But the just are guarded to the right hand, and are led with hymns sung by the angels appointed over that place into a region of light, in which the just have dwelt from the beginning of the world, not constrained by necessity, but ever enjoying the prospect of the good things they see, and rejoice in the expectation of those new enjoyments which will be peculiar to every one of them, and esteeming those things beyond what we have here, with whom there is no place of toil, no burning heat, no piercing cold, nor any briars there, but the countenance of the just, which they see, always smiles them, while they wait for that rest and eternal life in heaven." which is to succeed this region. This place we call the bosom of Abraham. Thus, from the comments of Josephus, we can understand that when Jesus spoke of these religious leaders about Hades having two compartments, they knew what he was speaking of. What I'm specifically referring to here is the parable of Lazarus and the rich man. You know this story, and Bible preachers have used this story for years to try to errantly scare people into doing good works. Let's read this passage. It says in Luke chapter 16, "There was a rich man who was clothed with purple and fine linen, and who feasted sumptuously every day. And at his gate was laid a poor man named Lazarus, covered with sores, who desired to be fed with what fell from the rich man's table. Moreover, even the dogs came and licked his sores. The poor man died and was carried by the angels to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried. And in Hades, being in torment, he lifted up his eyes and saw Abraham far off and Lazarus at his side. And he called out, 'Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus to dip the end of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am in anguish in this flame.'" Now when you read it, you will see that there is no place in this passage anywhere where these religious leaders questioned him or refuted him about this two-compartment concept. It was a concept with which they were familiar, just as Josephus said. So what was Jesus talking about here? Remember that according to Jesus, he always spoke to the people in parables. We know this from what he said, where he said, "All these things Jesus said to the crowds in parables. Indeed, he said nothing to them without a parable," recorded in Mark 13. That's pretty clear, isn't it? This was a parable, and it had a purpose. What was the purpose? It was specifically given with the idea of exposing the religious leaders of that day. These religious leaders were the rich man in this parable. Lazarus represented the spiritually starved people of Israel. The scribes and Pharisees had starved the people of spiritual truth and elevated themselves to being the only righteous ones. This is also a prophecy of sorts, in that the fortunes of these two classes were soon to be reversed. Those early Christians who followed Jesus were to be liberated prior to the siege of Jerusalem, and those who did not, as well as the religious leaders, were about to endure enormous sufferings at the hand of the Roman armies during the siege. The end of this matter, as shown by history, was the complete destruction of Jerusalem, the temple, and the end of the entire Levitical sacrificial system of worship. But now I want to go back and call your attention to what Josephus said about this place. Once again, I want you to notice that he did say that this was a place of temporary punishment. This was the Jewish thinking at the time. Nowhere in this parable does Jesus say that it was a place of eternal torment. There is one more point that must be considered when we consider the parable of Lazarus and the rich man, and that is the fact that there were no saints in heaven at the time. The door to heaven had not been opened up yet. Jesus himself told his disciples, "No one has ascended into heaven except he who descended from heaven, the Son of Man." Thus heaven would not open until Jesus himself opened that door after he ascended to heaven. This gives even more credibility to the two-compartment system that existed in Hades. Now, having said all that, I would like to point out that even though there have been many misconceptions about hell, or as Jesus called it correctly, Gehenna, it most definitely is a place to be feared. Notice what Jesus said about this place. I'm going to quote this time from the World English Bible, where it says, "But I warn you whom you should fear. Fear him who, after he is killed, has the power to cast into Gehenna. Yes, I tell you, fear him." Did you notice that Jesus said and made it clear that after one is killed, Gehenna is the next destination? It is clear that this is a terrifying place for humans to have to go. So what is it? Now, I would like to point out that there's so much more that needs to be understood about what we have talked about today. And in this short video, I've only touched the surface of what there is on this. So I would like to encourage you once again to go get a copy of my book, God's Purpose for Hell, a compelling probe of God's love for the lost, and it goes into much greater detail on these things. When we come back in our next session, we will look at Gehenna a little bit closer, as well as another view of this, which is called annihilationism. Until that time, I would like to say God bless and have a great day.